Hello, everyone. This is another episode with Candid Craic, and we have a guest who is in Hong Kong. Hello, Kay. How are you doing today?
Hello, Oscar. Thank you. It's, as you know, it's very hot here today.
It looks, are you working from home or from the office?
No, this is my office, home office, yes.
Okay. And we have co-host Richard. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Oscar. I've just been outside coaching kids tennis, which I do every Monday afternoon in 32 degrees and 90% humidity. So, yeah, a little frazzled, but pretty good.
You seem to have a bit of a color as well, yeah?
Yeah, picked up some sun, yeah, definitely.
So today we have Kay on the hot seat. Well, virtual one. Kay, before we start this session, tell a little bit more about yourself.
Ooh, wow. Where do I start? Born in Scotland, grew up in Adelaide, Australia, and I've been living in Hong Kong for 27 years. And I wear several hats. I'm self-employed, have my own business, and that combines three passions, three topics that I'm passionate about. One of them is marketing. So I write and edit English language marketing content and train people about marketing. I am a performer. So I perform improvisation, perform improv with an English language team here in Hong Kong. And because of that, I teach workshops for teams, organizations about how to approach life and business with an improv mindset, which I'll be talking about in our drinking dialogues sessions. And then I'm also passionate about personal development and healing. And the common thread that links all of those things is storytelling, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and the world.
Wow, there's a lot of interest you have there, Kay. So I guess today, the practice that you run at the moment, so tell a little bit more what you actually really focus on, because I think that is mostly on the improv, right?
I'd like it to be more of that. Mostly my career has been in the marketing side of things, the copywriting and editing, so I still do a lot of that. Yes, I'd definitely like to do a lot more of the applied improvisation stuff. And it's been very quiet in the past year. I used to do live events, and I'm still not quite convinced about the online version of that. It's possible. I mean, I know a lot of people who do it, and I haven't really got into that myself yet.
Can you describe to us what applied improvisation is? Well, you know, because it's probably quite a new phrase for many people.
Yes. Okay. Well, let me start with the word improvisation. Some people may know or be familiar with Whose Line Is It Anyway? The comedy show done in Britain and the US. So I perform with an improvisation troupe. We call it improv. Some people call it impro. I'm more familiar with the term improv. And that means a team of players who create scenes together on the spot without a script, inspired by random, unpredictable suggestions from the audience. Now, the applied part of that means taking the principles and mindset of onstage theatrical improvisation, taking that off stage and applying it in life and business, because there are actually some underlying principles that guide what we do on stage as a team together without a script. It's not just random chaos where everybody's just running around crazily saying and doing whatever they want. There is actually a structure to it that makes it safe, that enables us to do what we do together without a script. And life's a bit like that. You know, life and business don't come with a script. So a lot of improv performers like me around the world have found that the principles that enable us to do what we do on stage are actually useful for all sorts of people off stage, whether or not they want to perform improv. That's not the point. It's not about teaching people to perform improv. It's about giving them a visceral experience of playing some improvisational cooperative exercises, activities, games, we call them games, and then debriefing that for them to identify, well, okay, how is that relevant to my life or work? And there's been a lot of research done, and a lot of people have shown and used applied improvisation and have shown that it is actually very, very useful for building all sorts of skills that people and companies need, like teamwork and leadership, communication, creativity, emotional intelligence, and handling change and the unexpected, and the volatility of life and business, and uncertainty and risk, failure, mistakes.
That's wonderful. I mean, I've been to one of your workshops, and I hope to talk about that a little bit later. But before we do, because it was an exceptional workshop, and when we co-created a workshop together, yes. and it was stunning. And I think you enlivened the audience far more than I did. So it was a wonderful experience. But can you, before we go into sort of, what it feels like to actually be in part of those workshops, can you just talk us through some of those principles that you mentioned?
Yes. Well, there's no one global authority that has passed these down like gospel from the mountaintop. Many different people have their own different interpretations of it, different versions of it. Probably the one that most people would agree with and are familiar with within the improv community and applied improvisation community, and I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of this one, is the idea of yes and. Have you heard of that? You're familiar with, have you heard? Yeah, yes and. And that means, the yes part of it means accepting what the other person, in whatever situation you're in, or on stage, in a scene on stage, it means accepting what the other person has said or done and then building on it. So the and part means then you build on it. Now, it doesn't have to mean that you have to like or agree with what they've said. It means that you're willing to at least hear it, to allow space for them to have their say. Means having an open mind and creating a safe space so that people are willing to step up and express an opinion. So you just have an open mind to respect other people and not dominate the conversation, that it creates an open space. And then the and part means that you add to it so that they then have something to respond to. So it's a bit of a ping pong match back and forth. And off stage, that means in your family, in your whatever organization, in your church, your tennis club, your business, it means creating a corporate culture, creating a culture where people feel safe to step up and express an opinion, an idea, a suggestion for a project. So that's the yes and principle. That's probably the number one principle that many people are familiar with, and that all improvise. I mean, that's lesson number one when you go to an improv class. A couple of other principles of improvisation is make your teammates look good. Make your teammates look good. So it's not about you being the star of the show, because it's a team sport, and life and business is usually you're doing it in relationship with, or collaboration with other people. So it's about everybody having a worthwhile contribution, an important contribution to whatever's happening, whether that's planning an event for your family, or cooking dinner out of whatever ingredients you've got available on hand, or doing a big project at work. Making your teammates look good helps things to run more smoothly. And what I like about it is that if I help to make my teammates look good, I'm also trusting that they're doing the same for me. So it's a mutual thing. Yeah. So make your teammates look good. being mindful and present in the moment is really important, because we don't have a script. So it's very, very important to listen carefully to everything your partner is saying, whatever situation you're in, and not be jumping ahead to think about, oh, what am I going to say or do next? But to really, really listen to everything they say, because the last word they say might be the most important thing that will change the way that you respond. So it's not about planning and thinking, oh, well, I'm going to say this, and this is what I'm going to do next now, because by the time they've finished saying what they're saying, your ideas might change. So it's listening respectfully to what others say and do. And also the mindfulness part of it is about observing everything that's going on around you, something that's happening in the room, the sound of a police siren outside the building, and also what's going on inside yourself. Being present and mindful and centered and relaxed inside yourself and noticing what's going on physically, emotionally, because that will affect what you do next, or inspire it. You might get an intuitive urge, impulse to say or do something that you weren't planning with your logical brain. So mindfulness is really important. Making bold choices and committing to them and taking action. And then waiting for the feedback, waiting for the response, the reaction, which might make you change direction. So it's letting go of your preconceived fixed ideas and expectations about how a situation should go or will go, and just being open in every moment to what's happening in front of your nose, and being willing to pivot and change direction as the situation demands it, which is life as well, because we don't know what's going to happen next. What else? I think probably one of the most interesting and challenging ones is to embrace change, uncertainty, risk, mistakes, failure, because life is an experiment. Business is an experiment. We're trying things out, see what happens, see the result, and again, change direction if necessary. So getting comfortable with those things in a world that's, there's the old famous phrase that we use in all sorts of business fields is the VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Well, life's like that too. And an improvisation show, a game, is like that too, because we don't know what's going to happen next. But we trust the process, we trust the principles, and we practice. Like in improvisation, some people think it's strange when I tell them I'm going to an improv rehearsal, because they said, oh, but how can you rehearse? There's no script. But it's like a sport. You practice a sport because there are certain skills and rules of the game that you need to know. But on the day of the game, you don't know what's going to happen. You're constantly improvising.
It's a really good set. I mean, I see the relationship with all kinds of business skills, so contemporary business skills there. So again, I want to go back to that workshop that we did together, and I think I was actually, I don't think that was the one I took too much part in. I think I just framed it and opened it, and you were one of my starts. I had a few different guests, hosts, but I mean, it was one of these things. What we were trying to do was create workshops that were sort of the antithesis, different from the standard Hong Kong workshop where everybody came in and sat and listened to a speaker. And I had the rules of no ties, no jackets, no business cards,
no business cards,
no power dressing, all of this kind of stuff. And then you came in and I think that the best way to sum it up is what happened at the end. We couldn't get rid of people. I mean, at the an hour after the event had finished, we still had 60 people in the room, and it was like, come on, we've got to actually shut, because there was so much energy. So can you explain to the listeners, what actually taking part in one of these workshops is like? Because I've done it and I know it, but what from your perspective, what's it like?
It's not a PowerPoint lecture. It's a visceral experience where you actually get up out of your chair and move around and do some exercises, activities, games together with other people, because it's a cooperative thing where, I mean, and there's, every improv or applied improvisation trainer has a toolkit of like 100 possible activities that we could use for different purposes. And so I have the participants doing an activity. And then the most important part is the conversation after that about, well, okay, what did you notice? How did you approach that situation, that activity? What did you notice in your thoughts? What were the dynamics of the group? What worked? What didn't work? And most importantly, how do you think you might apply that learning back in life and work? Yeah. So it's giving people an experience of it, full body experience of it, rather than just putting theory into their head.
I mean, I can. Well, I've done some workshops with Oscar, and we do something, quite a similar embodied experience. Not about it, not with improv techniques, but to try and get people to sit up and move around and do stuff.
Yes.
One of the things that I do is look for, there's somebody who's a bit braver or a bit cheekier who'll come and do you do the same thing, that you can use the energy of that initial, the person who's just like, I'm going to stand up and have a go, and
yes. And sometimes it's also helpful to invite that person to just stand back for a moment and let a quieter person step forward and have a moment and to have the experience. Otherwise, it's all the extroverts in the room who dominate things. And a lot of introverts, shy people, even people with anxiety, take an improv class, not because they want to perform improv, but just because they want to be more confident around people. They want to be a more confident public speaker, for example. So it's not about, I should explain, improv is absolutely not about telling jokes and being funny. That's stand-up comedy, which is a different animal. I used to do stand-up comedy, but I much prefer improv because it's a team sport and I don't have to memorize a script. Stand-up comedy, they write and rehearse and practice a very strict list of jokes that they've prepared. It's all prepared, usually prepared. There might be a bit of interaction with the improvisational interaction with the audience, but basically they've prepared a script of jokes. That's not improv. But so improv is absolutely not about telling jokes and being funny. Yeah, it can be very funny, but that's not what we're thinking when we're going on stage or to do improv. We're not thinking, oh, I have to be funny, I have to be funny. No, that's not what it's about at all. It's about just interacting with each other and creating a story, creating relationships between characters. And the funny, if it is funny, the funny will just emerge from that. But it's not what we aim for.
I'm quite fascinated by this improv. I guess so. I've been running businesses for the last 10 years, right? So I've met a lot of founders who hate the planning part, who are very spontaneous, and they seem to be common. The one thing, so I want to kind of bring it back to, because I think one thing that people struggle with when they hear improv, they think about theater, acting, and all the other techniques that people associate that with. But for me, it's actually really relevant because I think I do this pretty much every day. Now you practice it. I don't call it improv. I don't know how I call it, to be honest.
Yes.
But the one thing that I've noticed working with people who are not used to a highly uncertain environment, as you said, is that uncertainty. So the one thing is that they plan everything, they have expectations, and it's really hard to let go of that.
Yes.
It's a lot harder for some reason. It almost comes natural. The first thing that people do when you say you're gonna do an exercise or you explain it, is people start planning straight away and they can't help themselves. So I just wonder, it's kind of the techniques that you introduce to kind of stop people from planning before they actually what's gonna happen.
Yeah, I agree. It can be scary, and that's why I reassure people that in an applied improvisation workshop, it's not about performing. You know, there's not a stage. People don't have to get up on stage and perform. It's just a group of people doing some activities and exercises together. And, you know, there's things that facilitators do at the beginning of a workshop to make people feel comfortable and safe. You know, so yes, sure, people might be starting planning in their head what they're going to do, and certainly in life and business we have to plan. There are situations we have to plan, and that's okay. I'm not saying you have to choose one or the other, planning or improv. You can do both at times, at relevant times for each one of those activities. So I could lecture people all day about the theory of why they should try out this improvisational mindset. That won't change anything. I find what works best is to just give them an opportunity to have a go and feel it and do it and notice what happens and what benefits they can get from it. I mean, I wrote a blog post about 34 reasons to learn improv, not to perform, but just to approach life and work with an improvisational mindset. And like the greater confidence is definitely one of them. Whether you want to perform or not, it doesn't matter. But yeah, there's so many benefits in life and business that people can use in all stages of business, whether it's purely the divergent thinking initial phase of generating creative ideas, or in the implementation phase. The improvisational mindset, I find, is still useful.
Yeah, so the one thing that you mentioned as well, because of course it's not really black and white, and there's a lot in between. So maybe this may help. So I've tried to kind of be more intentional with work, which requires a lot of planning.
Sure.
But the reason why I plan more is to actually have time to unplan, right? To kind of be unintentional.
Yes.
So and actually that really requires a lot of planning. I noticed way more, not instead of just doing 7 days something. And people seem to really think very black and white in this, you know, because I think I was posting this about my 3-day work week, and I said, in fact, no, it's not that I do nothing with the rest of the 4 days. It's just I just want to be more intentional when I need to improvise, or I can just plan. Right? It seems now we are all based here in Hong Kong. That planning seems to come very natural. Right? I mean, it's everyone seems to plan something. But if you ask them to stop planning, that seems to be very difficult. So I'm just really, really curious about what you do in those workshops to kind of loosen people up, basically.
We play
plan
games.
Stuff straight away.
We have fun. We have fun. Play, because play bonds people, and it helps the brain to be more creative. Play is a really important thing for adults as well as for children. Yeah, and also we have a principle in improv about, you know, tolerating mistakes and failure. It's celebrating people's willingness and courage to get up and have a go. It's not about being right. Because you know, people don't die in improv. In a scene, the character might die, but the actor doesn't. So we understand that it can be scary to get up and do something, or to do an improvisational activity. So we reassure people that it's safe, it's okay, and we'll celebrate their willingness to get up and have a go.
I mean, having experienced Kay's workshop, I mean, it's a build of energy, because at the beginning you've got a few, that's why I made the comment about, do you rely on one or two slightly braver people to start it off?
Sure.
And you had this energy where a few people who were willing to have a go.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end, everybody had thrown themselves into the task. So you'd gone from one or two brave people to the whole room, because you're sort of watching, you end up losing the fear about what you're doing, because everyone else is doing it. Nobody's watching you. Yeah. Everyone's all involved in their own bits of action. And it was really, I had sort of my sociological mindset in, because I was watching it whilst doing it. But that's just, that's part of why I hold those events.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fabulous, because everyone lost their inhibitions and contributed. But it was a slower build, and you sort of it was almost like you suddenly got to this inflection point, and it was just like took off, and it was incredible. So that's how I experienced it.
Yes. And I've led workshops where, sure, there might be one or two people in the room who are very skeptical, and that's okay. They'll take from it what they want. I can't force them to get up and do something if they don't want to. So again, that's just something that any facilitator has to deal with, is, how do you handle people who don't want to participate, or who think what you're saying is a load of rubbish? Well, that's okay. If they don't agree with what I say about the magic of improv and applied improvisation, that's okay. I can handle that.
I mean, I'm sort of building on this theme. So once you're in a workshop with you, and you've got all this energy, but one of the challenges must be the first approach to the organization, where you're like, okay, improv is one of the answers, and they're like, sorry, what? Exactly. So how, what does that look and feel like? This sort of, this, because I can see all of the value of everything that you've said. But I want to know what, you go in and sort of some hard-nosed HR person is what does that look and feel like?
Yes, we have many conversations about that in the applied improvisation community around the world. And certainly my approach is, I don't approach a potential client and say, hey, do you want to have an improv workshop? Because they probably have no idea what that is, or what it means, or they have a mistaken perception of what it's all about. They often think it's the same as stand-up comedy, which is not. So oftentimes the potential client will approach me because they want a workshop focusing on a very particular skill, like creativity or teamwork or communication or sales skills or whatever. So they have a particular reason that they want some kind of training workshop, and I can design a workshop and choose activities, exercises that will fit that theme that they want. So yeah, I would approach a potential client to say, do you want a workshop about teamwork or leadership or communication or creativity, all the things I mentioned? I certainly don't ask them, do you want an improv workshop? Because that definitely doesn't work. Yeah.
So you have to go into all these sort of trendy bits and pieces like innovation and creativity and almost trick your way in, as it were. I know trick is a bad word, it isn't the right word, but it's like, well, what you don't, instead of doing one of these basic process training, which is innovation looks like do step 1, step 2, step 3. You go in and you do all of this other stuff instead.
Yeah. And just in terms of the learning and the takeaways, I think, and I know a lot of research has shown that visceral activities, getting people up and doing something, they'll learn and apply much more than if I just give them a PowerPoint lecture. Yeah.
So can you? I mean, I from the workshop you did with me, I know at least one person who got a job through meeting someone else in that workshop. So I know that the impact and the output can be great. Yes. But do you have any stories about people who have done this kind of workshopping and said, oh wow, this produced something great in the organisation, some kind of impact in their life, etc.?
Yeah. one of my favorite bits of feedback was from a student who participated in a workshop I led there was undergraduate students of innovation and entrepreneurship at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Their professor, who had actually attended a previous workshop of mine, really liked it, and he saw how it would be useful for his students. So he invited me to come and do a workshop for them. And when I arrived, they had all the students were sitting in nice, neat little chairs facing the front with their laptops, preparing for a PowerPoint lecture and preparing to take notes. And I immediately asked them to put all their chairs and laptops to the side, and we played some improvisational games. And a couple of days later, the professor sent me some feedback that one of the students had said to him. And the student said something like, that was one of the best classes, if not the best class that I've ever had at university. Can we have more classes like that, please? Yeah, I thought that was just really fantastic. Yeah.
What I'm thinking of in terms of improv, right? As you mentioned, it maybe it has some kind of weird association with whatever people think of what it is. But to me, it's kind of learning to thrive with uncertainty, right? Learning to thrive in during uncertainty.
Yes, definitely, yes.
And that's why for me in sort of startup environment, this is actually really critical, right? And you don't call this improv, but it is literally just improvisation of, okay, what's going to happen?
They are improvising all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't really have so much choice. And you do see in terms of linking that to organizational design, where companies really go wrong as well, because there is a really fine line between, of course, you can't have too much flexibility and completely chaos and improvise everything.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. On the flip side, everything's organized and planned. Although that seems to in Hong Kong a little bit more it comes natural, I think, the planning part. The other part is way more difficult, and to find that balance, especially to unlearn that planning, is actually really key for me. And how you can train people to really embrace that uncertainty. Say, hey, you don't need to plan for the next 4 weeks your meetings. Just go with the flow. Try it for a week, and it's surprising how difficult it is for people.
Yeah, because I think in business or in life generally, the usual habit of responding to anybody's suggestion or idea is, typical in a business meeting where we're planning some project or activity. The common response is, oh yes, but we tried that last year and it didn't work. Or yes, but that's not the way we do things around here. That seems to be the most common muscle, the strongest muscle that people use. So the yes and mentality it feels strange at first, feels really uncomfortable at first. And doing an applied improvisation workshop can help people practice that, build up that new muscle, so it becomes more comfortable and they can apply it appropriately at work. Again, improvisation is not random chaos. It's about being open to what's going on around you and being open to hearing other people's ideas and opinions and being creative, coming up, generating lots of creative ideas. Now, of course, eventually you're going to say no to some of those ideas for all sorts of reasons, perfectly valid business reasons. And it's still useful to approach the whole process with an improvisational mindset.
Yeah, I mean, I can see applications as well as in sort of incubators and accelerators and the startup world. I mean, agile workplaces where they're supposed to be doing all this customer-centric problem solving. there's a real opportunity to run the conversations in this improvised way. I mean, and have you had the opportunity to do work with these kind of agile teams or incubator stroke accelerators?
I've done some workshops ages ago with Paperclip is a co-working space here in Hong Kong. They work especially with startups, and they brought me in to lead some workshops for members of Paperclip, the co-working space. So yeah, I think they found that very useful. Yeah, and I was thinking as well, I've got lots of examples of not my own personal work, but examples of how other applied improvisation trainers, facilitators around the world use it. Because it's not just in business, although that's certainly a huge need for that. But you know the actor Alan Alda?
Yes.
One of the stars of MASH.
Hawkeye, yes.
Exactly, yeah. He founded with Stony Brook University in New York State in the USA. He teaches applied improvisation and improv workshops to scientists so that they get better at communicating about their research to funders, to politicians, to the media, and to the general public. Very powerful results when he shows some before and after videos of how they describe their work in totally incomprehensible terminology, and then turning it into words that actually make sense to an ordinary everyday person. Yeah. And then a lot of doctors and nurses do an applied improvisation workshop to get better at communication and teamwork. And a lot of trainers use applied improvisation in workshops with people with anxiety, people with autism or dementia, or the carers of people with dementia, people with addictions. All of those groups of people can benefit and do benefit from an applied improvisation workshop. And there's been a lot of research, academic research about that and the benefits of that. And then there's an example of after Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines in 2013, improvisers went around the country leading workshops for communities, groups of people, to develop the skills and resilience to handle the next disaster improvisationally, because things are happening so fast and you've got to pivot and change and be open to whatever's happening and come up with solutions and ideas very quickly. An improvisational mindset is really useful for that. And then another example is that in New York, there's a project called Operation Cops and Kids, where police officers and at-risk teenagers get together to play some improvisational games, activities, which builds trust and respect. So there's 100 other ways where the applied improvisation concept can be applied in all sorts of fields around the world. And there is a lot of research done about that to show that it actually works.
So I mean, you've brought to mind something that Amazon does. So when they have the sort of decision meetings or just decision focused meetings, they don't use PowerPoints. They use narratives and storytelling. No, it's actually they call it a silent meeting. So they have to read the narrative. So actually, I think it's a 6-page document which is written as a narrative or a story, where they've had to understand what the clarity of storytelling looks like. So that so they sit and they silently read the story, and then they internalize it, and then they talk about for the first 20 minutes, and then the next 40 minutes they talk about it. So partly what you're doing is also the Alan Alda example is this is helping people do that. They're learning to express themselves via story. And I just wonder if the improvisation is just that further build on from, like, now we've got the initial story. Now we're making decisions around the edges of this story, and maybe that's an initial build on of what Amazon are already doing.
Yes, yes. There's so many ways to apply it. I certainly don't know all of them, but I do know that lots of people are using it in many interesting ways around the world. And I guess I'm an evangelist for applied improvisation. Yeah, yeah. And I tend to live my life that way too. I find it very hard to say yes, but I can't even say the word in my mouth because it feels strange. I tend to say yes, and I approach things with a yes and mentality. Now, that doesn't mean if a friend said to me, hey, let's jump out of a plane without a parachute. No, of course I'm not going to do that. But in general, I approach things with a yes and mentality. Yeah.
One thing that we skipped, or maybe I overheard that, is get actually involved in this, in the improv, because you mentioned that you've got this amazing broad skills, and improv is one of them. But how you actually started to get more serious about this?
What would be really useful for me is to get more of the techie skills to do it online, because that would reach a much bigger audience around the world, not just people in Hong Kong. So I need to learn some skills there. Yeah.
Where did the passion come from? Where was your first sort of the injection of improv into Kay Ross's life?
I've been an actor since I was a teenager. I was a member of a youth theatre group in my teens. And then I studied drama for a year at university, and I've been performing amateur theatre ever since. Then I did stand-up comedy for a while. And then I started doing improv in about 2007, 2008. And very quickly realised that, hey, these principles are useful in life as well, not just performing on stage. And then I discovered that I wasn't the first person to realise that. So then I connected with this Applied Improvisation network community around the world. And I've been learning and studying about it ever since. And as I said, when I introduced myself, I'm also passionate about storytelling. So, weaving the storytelling into that is part of it as well. And I'm also particularly interested in the intersection of improvisation and personal development, personal growth and healing. So can
you talk a little bit? So I mean, either or, talk a little bit more about the storytelling and a little bit more about the personal development intersections.
Well, storytelling, as Oscar was just saying, storytelling is a really useful skill to use in all sorts of business applications, in sharing your ideas with people, convincing people about your ideas, inspiring people to do something, to feel something. And as a marketing copywriter, of course, I use storytelling as well all the time in my writing. I just see the applications everywhere. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And personal development and healing?
Yes, because improvisation is a team sport. It's about mindfulness. It's about teamwork. Telling stories. I've done workshops where I combine some improvisational exercises with some personal development exercises about choosing more useful, resourceful stories about yourself and the world, because we all have stories in our head that we tell ourselves about ourselves and the world, and some of them are useful and some of them are not. So using some improvisational processes can help me and people to try on different ways of being, to be a new character for a while, or to choose a new thought. And how would you behave if you were the kind of person who did X or believed Y? That's improvising. So, and with the personal development and healing, as I said, there's a lot of people with autism or people with anxiety find that an improv workshop can be really, really helpful to to help them be more comfortable just being around people and interacting with people and speaking.
Yeah, I mean, there's something boundary breaking in it, isn't it? That seems core. I mean, we haven't really talked about that, but there's a role breaking, boundary breaking, identity breaking, structure breaking thing happening.
Yes.
And it allows people to explore perhaps someone they don't feel that they've been allowed to be because of all of these labels and restraints.
Yes, and about what they think is possible for them or not. Yeah, and the same applies in organizations. I think applied improvisation is actually subversive because it challenges the status quo. Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons perhaps it's difficult to get past the gatekeeper.
Maybe they don't know, they don't suspect that it's subversive. I think it's difficult to get past the gatekeeper mostly because they've never heard of it before. They know about outdoor physical workshops, activities that people go to for team building and team bonding, but they've probably never heard of applied improvisation, and therefore it's risky for them to introduce something new to the company that they've never heard of before. Yeah.
It seems a bit of a paradox, right? But as you are trying to introduce that flexibility of neuroplasticity,
yes,
and people are very reserved about this. Because to Richard's point, yes, the way I understand this, you really try to break down barrier, really try to help people to self-express them in a more articulate way or through different means, either verbally writing it down or with the body. Of course, with the body it's a little bit more difficult to the virtual space. So I can see the real benefits of doing that, to really the entire person to express yourself, right? So either, and what I'm really interested in is how you combine it with that storytelling as well.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of exercises that we can do in an applied improvisation workshop about storytelling. There's one very popular common activity or game, we call it a game, a word at a time story. It's a very simple exercise you can do in a staff meeting at work just for fun. Word at a time story, making up on the spot. And each person says one word at a time around the circle, one word at a time, to tell a story. And nobody knows what direction the story is going to go in. Nobody controls it. Everybody controls it. And it's funny, I did that exercise in a workshop with a group of people. And one guy got really, really angry. He hated the game, he said afterwards. And I asked him why. And he said, because the story didn't go the way I wanted it to. Well, yeah, because one person doesn't have control. It's a group process. The group together in the moment comes up with it, and nobody's directing it, so nobody can control it. That's the beauty of it. That was really funny. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things about that is, of course, if you're lucky enough to get an opportunity to have a central word in a story, because you don't have a the or an at or an and, you can nudge the story in certain directions, but that's all you can do is choose a word carefully that nudges it somewhere.
Yes.
And see if it's picked up on by others, or it goes into further directions you didn't even foresee in a million years.
Well, and even in that process, the words the and are really important. They're necessary parts of the story, the sentence. And what I also love about it is that you can't be planning too far ahead. Like, that your turn is in like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you're next. You can't be planning that far ahead, because the person immediately before you, their last word might be something that, as you said, Richard, it takes the story in a completely new direction that you weren't expecting. Your next line has to be in response to what that last person just said. So you can't be planning too far ahead.
And the person who sat there and said, I didn't like this because I didn't have any control. I mean, what, did you manage to get a reflection session at the end where that was discussed, or?
Yeah, at the end of the whole workshop, I think we did, and he sort of calmed down, and he still participated in the rest of the activities. I don't know what he did afterwards. Yeah.
I mean, because it's an insightful piece of information about oneself. Is when I'm part of a group and I have no power other than just an enabling nudging power that everyone shares equally, I struggle. I mean, that's an important reflection piece.
Yes, yeah. I mean, yes, the concepts of power and status, which is slightly different, are really useful. Playing some improvisational activities, games, is really useful to play with, to explore, to experiment with different levels of power status. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was one of the key things about your workshop that I attended is the power disappeared in the room, and then people were just randomly talking to everybody else without power and status getting in the way, which was paradoxically so powerful, of course.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think we have one more question, Kay, which we always finish with, which we call the $9 trillion question, which is the argument that we make that the OECD has 9 trillion of lost revenue per year, or failed value creation per year. Although I've just had Gary Hamill, whose idea it was, refresh that and say, no, it's 10 trillion now. So we might need to change the question. So the question is, if all organizations took improvisation seriously, and it was part of organizational development, how would that impact this lost 9 trillion? Where would the value creation come?
There'd be a lot more engagement of people participating in the work, in coming up with creative ideas, in cooperating with each other instead of competing. Just stepping up to be a leader. Like in improvisation, there's not one person who's leading all the time. So in any moment, somebody else can step into the role of a leader temporarily because they've got the skills or the desire to do it. And then a week, a month later, however long later, they can step back and someone else will step up to take over. So it's about sharing the power, sharing the responsibility. I think people would just enjoy life and work a lot better, and they'd be kinder to each other.
That's something I would quite like, kinder organizations. I don't think that's a particularly bad thing to end on. Oscar, do you?
I think it's fantastic work that you do, Kay. I'd like to thank you for this wonderful interview, and Richard, you as well.
Thank you, Oscar.